All right, great. It's very clear that we're all here to learn, innovate, collaborate, and interact with each other on different things across building Kenya's financial ecosystem. Kevin, I think it's time to move into the next segment. What do you think about that?
Yes, definitely. It's about time we just set the ball rolling much more, moving into our next segment. But for any person just joining in, this is a Kima's learning event, and it's all centered on the theme Access and Impact, bearing in mind that the lessons that we've curated alongside the topical areas are centered around access and impact. And bearing in mind also, we're just not just doing a conversation and building dialogue to just end here. We're also just urging you to ensure that you share this particular conversation to the respective social media handles. And if you really want to interact with not only what's happening, but also what's happening online, we're streaming live within the USAID Kenya Investment Mechanism YouTube page, and also within the USAID Kenya Investment Mechanism Facebook page. And the two hashtags that we've developed and curated up for this is hashtag USAID Kim Learning Event and hashtag to invest in Kenya. Right about now, it's a time for me to take you up onto the second panel that's coming in on this first day of the Kim Learning event. And it's a panel centered on information technology and how probably different stakeholders are leveraging up on information technology to drive uptake within different segments within the small and medium enterprise. This particular panel is going to be led and moderated by Brenda Kerubo. Brenda Kerubo, as far as I understand and as far as I knew her, she was until I think last week working as a news reporter and business anchor at KTN Business. I know she's transitioning. She's here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just rise up, not rise up, but really just encourage her with some hearty claps as she gets on stage. Brenda, the stage is yours.
Good morning, some energy. All right. Thank you so much, Kevin, for the lovely introduction. I really appreciate. So for this specific session, we have an A-star panel. We have Julio De Souza, who is the Vice President of Stratlink Advisory Group. Welcome on stage, Julio. Of course, he is a financial advisor, management consultant, and a senior entrepreneur with 14 years of experience across multiple industries. Now, they're selected as an Acumen Fund East Africa Fellow, inaugural class of 2011, and he is also a mentor of entrepreneurs at Unreasonable Institute, Growth Hub, and MLab. Welcome to this session.
Thank you.
All right. And then we also have Stefano Kakofora. Stefano is the CEO of iProcure Limited. Of course, that focuses on he chose to pursue a career in systems engineering and began his career working for a branch of Philips Engineering as a systems engineer and started extensively overseeing large development projects in Cameroon, Haiti, post-earthquake, of course, very interesting. And he holds a bachelor's in engineering, mechanical engineering from Oxford Brookes University. Welcome. All right. And also joining us online is Julian Michel. We call him Mitch. Mitch, if you could hear me. Mitch is the CEO of Inspira Farms Limited. He is commercially minded business executive who has successfully shaped, led, and developed organizations in fintech, off-grid energy, and the British military in Europe, Central Asia, and East Africa. He holds a Master of Science in Defense Geospatial Information from Cranfield University. Welcome, Mitch. All right, so a round of applause for our panelists. Agriculture is one of the key contributors to our economy. I mean, most of the people involved in the rural areas, at least 70% of them are either employed directly or indirectly in this sector that contributes at least 27% to the gross domestic product or the total number of goods and services produced in the economy. Now, that said, the sector is, however, not growing to its full potential. There is a lot of headwinds, there's a lot of challenges, especially for farmers when they're trying to sell their produce and at the same time using smart technology in order to increase their produce. Now, to begin with, let me start over with you, Stefano. This is quite informative. What is your company doing in relation to solving the challenges that are affecting SMEs concentrated in the agriculture sector?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the problems that we're focused on solving are really sort of centered around the agrovet or the agro dealer, right? And introducing some level of data flowing upstream towards input suppliers, right? With the ultimate goal of eliminating instances of agricultural input scarcity and also lowering the price point for smallholder farmers. And the approach that we take is agro-dealer-centered approach, where we work with agro-dealers to sort of enhance their capacity to serve smallholder farmers, right? As you guys know, agro-dealers are embedded in smallholder farming communities and are a key source of not only inputs but also advice and extension services for commercial smallholder farmers. So really that's what we've been working on for the last 8 years or so, 10 years, 9 years, a long time.
Yes, since 2013. Let's go way back to 2013 when you first started this business. What necessitated the introduction of this business, and how did you go about setting up the business within the country?
It's easy for me to look back and say there was a master plan, but there really wasn't. There's some level of opportunism that you have to sort of, if you're honest, you have to sort of factor in. It just seemed like distribution channels, particularly in rural areas, were not operating optimally, right? And there was really no reason for them not to sort of operate efficiently. So the truth is, we were not really focused initially on the agricultural input sector. We were generally interested in optimizing rural distribution, but we found the most acute need to be in agriculture, right? And if you're going to spend 10 years of your life doing something, then it might as well be something that's going to at least have some significant contribution to improving lives. So really, that was it. In terms of our current model, again, there was no master plan. It was really just about engaging with the market and bashing our heads against the wall until we found something that worked. And now we have something that really works. And but I think we'll get into that later on.
Yes, of course, dear Stefano. We will discuss that further. But I just want to rope in Julian, who should be able to give us more insights also in relation to the agriculture sector. How have the challenges within the country and also in Africa, how has it created opportunities for solutions to be provided?
So Inspira Farms is a cooling company. It was originally set up 10 years ago by some founders who were, in my opinion, fairly kind of visionary in the fact that they understood that while there was a huge amount of effort going into increasing yields, there was less effort and focus being put on the post-harvest. But yet in the post-harvest, there was so many losses. And those losses, the smaller the agribusinesses and you get down to the smallholders, that only felt even more so. So really the question that the business posed was like, how do we reduce the post-harvest loss? Because in horticulture, Kenya, anywhere between 30 and 50% of the of the production can be lost through post-harvest loss during the post-harvest. That's terrible. If you think of, imagine if you're losing 30% and suddenly you drop that to 15%, what that means for your bottom line and the profitability and the sustainability of the business is gigantic. So really, Inspira Farms is trying to use a combination of cooling, which is very accessible in high-income parts of the world, and in Northern Europe, something like 95% of farms have direct access to cooling, whereas on the continent it's probably less than 5%. So there's a huge gap there, and the access of cooling means you can really change that post-harvest loss rate. We've demonstrated that multiple times with all sorts of clients and different value chains. The real question now for us as a company is, how do we actually roll that out further to impact food loss across the broader base of agriculture? That's important to us because of the following facts, which I get, most people in this room will know this, I'm sure, but just in case not, horticulture is obviously a huge sector within Kenya, but something like 5 to 7% is exported. There's a lot of value generated from that 5-7% for the country's GDP, but ultimately the rest of that is kind of more linked to the domestic market. And that's where you're having the huge losses. And that's where, when you think of things such as food security, insecurity, economic sustainability, and then impact on climate, that's where I think cooling has a huge role to play. And I can talk a bit more about those things later on in the discussion.
And just to add on that, clearly technology is becoming a critical role when you're talking about that cooling infrastructure. How do you go about introducing that in rural areas, and also the financial aspect related to that? How do you make it feasible on the ground?
I think there's a couple of things. First off, some of the guys and girls in this room may know this, but cooling is not straightforward. You don't just put a box, make it cold, and everything is good. Everyone can relate to that. If you put a hot dinner inside your fridge, it will mess up the other things in your fridge, right? And it will heat up, and it will cause problems. It will draw electricity. It's complex. So the first thing is to understand what it is you really want to do. That's the first thing. Understand. What is it? What produce has been received at what point? What temperature be? What temperature do I need to get it to? Because ultimately we're giving infrastructure to form part of a cold chain, and if you want it to be a cold chain, you've got to make sure all the bits kind of line up in place. But doing those things successfully, and I should have said this as a company, we try to achieve 4 things. The first thing is minimize food losses. That's where you get a huge upside, and you really get some ROI. Second is we try to increase shelf life, and that also helps with the locking in the consistency of the products. Thirdly, we try and make sure we reduce your costs, because ultimately you're running a business and we want to try and reduce your costs. And then fourthly, we give you access to data to understand that. So how do we make it work on the ground? Well, the answer to that is a combination of firstly understanding what the real problem is, and making sure we have a solution that's make sure we design a solution that is suitable for that. So there's no point in giving you a Rolls Royce if you need a Bada. It just doesn't make sense. It may look beautiful. So getting the product fit right for the customer and what the customer's ambitions are is the main part of doing that. I can talk a little bit about financing later on as well, if that's helpful. But ultimately, we are talking about significant investments, and financing has to play a part in this. Some of the technology behind these systems need to, you've just got to invest in finance. To get scale, you need to use finance to get real scale. Is the point. Sorry, thanks very much.
All right, and we'll talk about financing like you're saying there. Stefan, I want to come back to you. And like you talked about briefly about 2013 when you're setting up the business to actually growing the solution, but it wasn't all that neat. I mean, like you said, all this requires money, and also it requires advisory services. How did you go about it, and at what point did you incorporate the Kenya investment mechanism?
Yeah, you're right. It's a lot of moving parts, and to be honest, a lot of goodwill. So I'm born and raised in Kenya, and the investment climate when I was lucky enough to go and study was nowhere near where it is today. And while I was working in Haiti, I took some time off, and I came back home, and my brother just started a company and managed to raise investment for it. And so it was a completely different landscape. And all of a sudden, impossible dreams started to sort of materialize. Now, when I say there's a lot of goodwill, I mean, there was an ecosystem that was developing at that point. you had Village Capital, Growth Africa. Actually, funny enough, I just met Caroline here today, and she actually helped us draft our first financial policies for the business, I think back in 2014. Thank you for that. And that again was sponsored not by Kim, but still that was something that was facilitated by USAID. And those things, participating in those programs, is really what got us investment ready, right? So every stage of investment requires a different level of readiness. Our first equity investment was $250,000 from a US-based VC operating out of Boston, and the level of readiness for $250,000 is nowhere near what you need when you're raising, $15, $20 million. And so every stage of the company's life, and you have to be acutely aware of what you need and who you need to surround yourself with as a business. And so I'll give you a walkthrough. I think in 2014, when we closed the $250,000, it was just me and the three other co-founders, right? And we had decent records. Thanks in large part to Caroline, we had decent financial systems for a business at that scale. And so, it's sort of, people start looking at you differently, particularly funds. Say, okay, these people, they have their ducks in a row. They look a lot more investment ready than, a lot of the other businesses out there that may have an amazing product but no systems to support the rollout of that product. So it really depends where you get. So up until about $1 million in equity, which was in 2017, we were able to do that in-house, right? Obviously, with a lot of goodwill from the likes of Village Capital, USAID, which was the Kenya Food, KFIE, I forget what it's called. So we had a bit of support from them. But then, once you got to $4, $5, $10 million, it's a different league, right? You start looking at developing an investment memorandum, something I never heard of until maybe 3.5, 4 years ago. Decks. You start looking through a list of suitable investors. There's a strategy, there's an approach on how to go about it. It's not just sort of, you kind of have to look at what the theme that this investor is interested in and sort of not necessarily tailor your story to that, but ensuring you're not barking up the wrong tree and wasting time. So programs like Kim, I see them as, the way I see it is, in many ways, I think iProcure we can be sort of viewed in the same light. Programs like Kim are it's like setting up a power station, right? That pumps in maybe 100 megawatts into the grid. You don't feel it, right? But it does lower the overall cost of energy, right? And it has a huge impact on cost of production, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of see them as sort of like the ghost in the machine, if you will. I don't know if you guys are sort of anime, if you watch any anime, but the ghost in the machine, you don't really see the effects firsthand, but you do end up feeling them, right? And here we are, all these years later, still with a lot to prove, but having raised substantial amounts of investment that can fuel growth. Yeah. Thanks.
So before we delve a little bit deeper into that, and of course that's where I'm going to rope in Julio. Kevin, I don't know where you are. We have a set of questions.
I think maybe you can come in. I don't know where Kevin's is.
Oh, yes, Laurette.
Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, do you have any questions to the panel handling digital information technology affairs? Is there any question from the room? None? Okay. Is there one? Where? All right, then I think I'll ask a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah? All right. Gentlemen in the panel, I think one of the critical questions I'd like to ask is with regard to managing competition in the market. Yeah. If we look at small and medium enterprises, at times the competition power is quite low, And by the time already advanced companies are taking over the market, they have a very limited playing field to catch up with the rest of the industries. So how do you manage that and ensure that they're properly included in the financial ecosystem? I don't know which of you will take that, but I hope it's clear.
Julio should take it up because he deals a lot with advising these specific firms on what to do and also accessing financing. Perhaps you can touch on that question to begin with, and at the same time, how do you make a good pitch?
Good one. Well, first on competition, I think that this is, fortunately, the agriculture space is not a zero-sum game in terms of the competitive landscape. I mean, this is a market, this is a sector that contributes to over 30% of GDP in Kenya and will be very similar across Africa. So it's a sector that also can grow, right? So it's not a sector that, you're going to have to divide the pie into a number of competitors and there's no scope or opportunity for the pie to grow. I think that the agricultural sector in Kenya can be a lot more productive. I think moving the needle from smallholder farmers to more, subsistence smallholder farmers to productive farmers and the opportunities for export, I think that this pie can grow a lot. So in the agricultural sector, I think competition is more welcome, even from the companies themselves. I mean, in our case, we work with several agricultural companies, sometimes in the same market, right? I mean, they are not maybe direct competitors, but they are in the same space. And we never had a problem from the client's perspective and from our perspective to work with companies in the same sort of sector. We feel like competition is healthy and necessary for the market to mature and grow. On the question about what is a good pitch, a good pitch, I think is something that you have to understand your audience, right? I mean, what Steph was saying, that when you're raising $250,000 and you're talking to a VC from the US, you need to understand their perspective, right? I mean, what are they interested in? Is an impact investor? Is a tech investor? If you go up the ladder and you're looking at a private equity fund that is looking to invest $10 million, for instance, a pitch deck doesn't work. They will be expecting an IM, which is something a lot more comprehensive and boring, if you will. So you really need to understand your audience, right? You cannot show an agricultural deck to a tech VC, right? Because the ag tech space, if we go back to the topic of the panel, agricultural and technology, this combination is quite new. Steph and I had, I would say over the years, over 200 investor calls. A lot of them would say, but is this company ag or is it tech? They wanted to put you in a box. And you talk to a tech investor and they say, well, there's too much agriculture. And then you talk to an agriculture investor, but there's too much tech. So the ag tech in particular is such sort of a new sector, if you will, that creates a little bit of confusion for you to do a good pitch. So to make a long story short, a good pitch is one that is delivered to the right audience. It has to be engaging. It has to be short. Don't forget that. It has to be well put together with a layout, and and it has to be something that people spend time looking at it. We're using now a really good tool, and we're not sponsored by it by any means, but we're using now DocuSend, which has really changed the game of how we put pitches out. This tool is one that you can actually upload this, you can send a deck to an investor, and you can actually see how many seconds or minutes they spend in each slide, which for me was a really learning experience, because we put a deck together and you think that this is the strongest slide, or that is the weakest slide, and now you can actually track how much time people are spending in each slide, which is really important when you're putting a deck together. So now there's some tools that can help you how to put a very good pitch, but focus on the audience. That will be the short answer to it.
Of course, and thank you to technology. Not too much technology. Julian, I would like to rope you back into this. Talk to us about the pitch that you had when you were setting up the company. And what did you include that when the investor spoke to you sort of stood out when you were making that pitch? And what are some of the lessons that you can tell people who are now at the developing stages and they're looking at getting investors into their business?
Yeah, sure. So I just to be very clear, I didn't found the company. I joined the company a year and a half ago as CEO. I have been through some investment rounds. And Kim, I also wanted to take this opportunity to say the work, Kim sponsored some work through Cross Boundary. That was hugely helpful. And I actually think the team at Cross Boundary did a fantastic job. And I still speak to them. Mo in particular has just been, it was fantastic and that helped. Like, I actually want to build on what's just been said there. There's a couple of things for me. First one is I consider the investment landscape is that you have to speak a different language. And the language that you're going to talk in a customer, and this is kind of the point that was made, I guess, in a way, which is know your audience. So to me, that was learning that language. And to be clear, I feel like I can just about put a sentence together in terms of a language. I don't feel like I can get a full paragraph, and I definitely can't write an essay yet. But if it is an analogy, which is kind of why you need experts like we've got on the stage to help you guide you through this process when you're trying to raise the bigger money. The other thing, well, like tech is really, really important, to our pitch and how we've gone. But you also need to be able to tell a story of how you are going to make the business work and what is that path to profitability and why, what are those assumptions and what you need to do. And ultimately, you need to be able to demonstrate that there really is a genuine business behind it, because just doing good, ultimately, there's many impact investors out there who want to kind of demonstrate impact. They also want to demonstrate a return, and showing your workings of how you're going to do that is really important to the investment. That's been a big part of it. And so I've built my pitch across multiple assumptions. I think this is going to be able to happen, and that's going to be able to happen. And then trying to really build out why we have those assumptions. Is it something that we just made up? Or is it, I think I can do about X sales, or, I think the market's about Y size. But the more data and the more you can get behind those assumptions to build the narrative around what you're going to do. And that's both for the internal audience of the company, so everyone understands where the company's going, but also the external audience. I find that's been a huge part of trying to have more serious and kind of, for want of a better phrase, grown up conversations with investors and discover whether or not there's going to be a fit. And I think the other kind of thing I've really focused on again, it kind of reiterates the points that have kind of already been made, but like, who is it that you want as an investor? It's very hard chasing the money, but you also want to pick people who are going to be collaborative and work with you. My current set of investors, I speak to them regularly on many, many topics, not just on kind of the performance of the company, and that bringing in that additionality has been really important to me over the last few years. With Inspira Farms. But so I just want to re-echo, this is about increasing the pie and making people more successful, making our customers more successful, demonstrating that. I think it's about the fundamentals of the business, and it really matters. You've got to be able to show a path to profitability, and you may not hit all your targets at all times, but you've really got to be able to demonstrate something real and back up your assumptions with reality. And then the last one is learn the language, and that probably means getting someone who can speak the language, such as the advisor from StratLink or someone else on the stage.
Thank you so much. And just before we finish up with that, Julian, I would like you to also add on the fact that where do you find these investors? Is it that now you have your pitch ready, your audience? How do you access them? Do you Google random search? Do you network? How do you find them? Or sometimes they find you?
Yeah, all of the above and more. I actually think the first thing is it's all networks, right? Everything is networks. So the first one for me is using your existing network to ask and put the word out there from that point of view. There are databases and tools out there, and there's various databases and tools. There's about I've come across multiple databases of different investors across the continent. They kind of seem to range in about the 300 to 400 mark of people, and then there will be obviously more beyond that as well. So you then kind of like, well, who is it I really want? Well, these guys are PE, so take them out. That's just not something that's going to be relevant to me. So the more you understand what your ask is, the more you can target who you're going to go and speak to. So we've done a fair amount of that. I've also done a fair amount of approaching people who've said no in the past. That's for two reasons. One, maybe they'll say yes this time. Probably not, but they might. And two, to just get continued feedback, because if they've said no to us in the past, it also gives me a bit of an understanding of why they said no, and have I addressed some of those concerns, or are those concerns relevant or still relevant, and have I addressed them? And I won't go in publicly what it means, but that's really helped craft a lot of big parts of the pitch that we've put forward as well.
All right, thank you so much, Julian. And Stefano, let's talk about the first conversation you had with USAID Kenya Investment Mechanism. What was it, and what were they looking for?
To be honest, I don't really remember the specifics, but it was something along the lines of facilitating us. In fact, maybe to go back to what Julian was saying on how to go about raising funds. Based on my experience, and I don't think I speak for everybody here, but what I found has worked for me and the company really well is division of labor, if you will, right? So one of the wonderful things about what Kim has been able to do, and Stratlink as well, who are our sort of business advisory partners, is that they've helped the management of the company focus all their efforts on ensuring that the story that the advisory firm is selling to the investors is actually true. Right, so effectively, what that does is it frees us up to focus on making sure we can focus on business fundamentals. We can ensure that we're on track to achieving our forecasted revenues, and that we're coming good on our promise to the investor, or the prospective investor. Right. So I find that if you can, as a business, afford to work with one of these advisory firms, I would highly recommend it, because it really does free you up to focus on what you should be focusing on as the people running the business, right? Which is running the business. So really, discussions with Kim have really centered around how they can add additional value, right? What are the smallest levers we can move to really maximize impact on what we're doing? We currently have an ongoing conversation with Kim on how we can leverage some of the tech we've already built and the distribution network that we have to shield farmers from price shocks. For instance, in fertilizer, prices have been going crazy. So how we can leverage that technology and the distribution network that we've built to at least shield them to some extent against those price shocks. Those are the conversations. That's the last conversation we had with Kim, and that's the one that's most fresh in my mind. But the first one was years ago. I'm sorry, I'll be making things up if I told you. I can't remember.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions? We have any questions from the audience? Okay, right there. Laurette, Kevin's.
Okay. Perhaps just based on digital engagement, I can see one right there. I'll be coming to it just now. With regard to digital engagement, a specific question coming from Isiolo that's asking, what role can the government play in ensuring that rural communities are also able to take up such innovative solutions and participate in the process and perhaps connect entirely? I don't know, maybe you can answer that as I move to that side and select the next participant who may have a question.
Julio, better place to answer.
I mean, it's iProcure, I think, is a case in point of how rural communities and sort of inclusion in the digital transformation process because of the nature of how cities are and peri-urban areas, I think all sort of tech innovation have focused in these areas. iProcure, I think, is a statement of a company that have developed a tech platform that is fit for purpose for rural areas and all the technical aspects of it. I think that the question, I think, is one that, you know, how companies can see the sort of the rural areas as a viable, you know, market for innovation, because private sector development, as we all know, is led by the sort of economic incentive, right, of these opportunities, and that's how it works. We do believe there's a lot of value in rural areas, you know, as a market in different sectors. It's more, I think, about companies understanding how to serve this specific market and how to include them in this innovation process. I think all Kenyans would appreciate that M-Pesa is everywhere in the country now, right? Safaricom coverage, and it wasn't like that in the beginning. I think it's because there is a movement of understanding how to monetize, you know, the rural market, if you will, and see how innovation can trickle down to that specific sort of area.
But still, digital inclusion is still a major challenge in rural areas.
Without a doubt, right? I think we all understand that the price of data for people living in rural communities is, you know, prohibitive, even though the access is there. Cost-wise, I think, is still an issue. I'm not going to mention electricity because I think most people here will be familiar that it's still in rural areas, electrification is an issue. But I think the government has done great strides in the rural electrification program, and also private companies. But I think that there are lots of challenges, right, to make you know, a very large area of the country that has basic infrastructure to be included in this digital transformation process. But I think Kenya is a case, a success story by all accounts on how this is possible.
All right, Laurette.
My name is Felicita from SoftLink. My question is mainly to iProcure. How did you identify the gap in the agricultural value chain and then produce a product that responds to that gap? And I ask this because I know a lot of tech companies develop products that are never able to go to market. Mm-hmm. And you find that the market is in need of products that are not available. So what was your process? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe it's worth mentioning or rather highlighting what specifically we do, right? So iProcure is an agricultural distribution company and an ag tech company, right? So we really have two things that we do. We build technology, so software, and we also build the hard infrastructure to ensure goods get to where they go, right? So let's talk about the technology. I mentioned earlier that our tech focuses and is centered around the agro-dealer. So a lot of these agro-dealers need software to run their business. So we've built a mobile-based ERP that does everything at the store level. Inventory now takes 1 hour. You don't have to shut down your shop for a day. So all the agro-dealers using our tech, and there are thousands of them now, they don't have to shut their store for a day to do a stock take. They are able to process sales. They're able to accept various forms of payment. They're able to use an inbuilt CRM system to track credit sales to farmers. And you know, I have contrarian views on credit being issued to farmers, but we can talk about that later. And it effectively helps them to really take control of their operation. In fact, there are several instances of agro-dealers that have scaled from 1 store to 7 stores all over the country because of the controls that this software affords them. Now, just to add to that, this software is free, right? Obviously, there's a hardware cost. It has to be hosted on a hardware, a tablet, or you know, a dedicated piece of hardware, a mobile phone. So there's a cost element there, but the actual software is free. We develop it, and we train them, and we move them from paper-based systems to digital systems for free. Now that's enormous value for the agro-dealer. What we get, because it's sort of a knife that cuts both ways, right? What does iProcure get? iProcure gets access to data. We're able to see inventory levels, sales, we're able to know, we're able to interrogate our system now and tell you what levels of DAP we have in a given county, right? To a fairly accurate, to a fair degree of accuracy. And that data informs what we stock in our distribution centers. So now comes the other side about what we do. The physical infrastructure we build. It's one thing to build an application that tells a farmer tomatoes cost, I don't know, 60 shillings a kilo. It's another to actually move those tomatoes from point A to point B so they can get sold. And then effecting the payment and completing the transaction. So that infrastructure doesn't exist. So to answer your question, why do most applications fail? There's we're talking about moving bits. No one's talking about moving atoms, right? So you need to move the sack of fertilizer. The 50 kilogram sack of fertilizer has to be loaded onto a truck. There have to be loaders. There has to be a warehouse manager. There has to be a receipting system for that warehouse. And then when it gets to the point where the customer is, they have to then process the transaction there, collect the money through some means. So it's not as simple as we'd like to think. And a lot of the businesses we tend to emulate here are in developed economies, while ours is still developing, right? So you need to have take a very realistic look at where we are and what is needed. So we ended up building both. We built the technology, and we're also building the infrastructure. So we have I think now we have 14 distribution centers across the country that facilitate next day delivery. You order before 3 p.m. today, before 1 p.m. tomorrow, you get 94% of your orders of what you ordered at the shop. And that's no easy feat. I mean, you're talking about vast distances in rural areas. Some roads are impassable during certain times of the year, particularly during the short and long rains. So it's not easy to sort of maintain that. So this is why I think most applications, most technology systems don't really have long legs, because it's not just about building a nifty tool. This is not fintech. It's effectively logistics. So at the end of the day, you still have to have parallel systems that mirror the digital systems that make sure the products get to where they're supposed to go. That's really what, my humble opinion, that's what I think is sort of hindering, a lot of these technologies from sort of gaining the momentum that they need.
All right.
Okay, Brenda, there are two questions on this edge to feed into that. I don't know if you're willing to pick them concurrently and then feed into the next segment of your questions.
Yes, of course.
Be
And
okay?
I also want Julio to comment a little bit on what he said, because I think it's very critical for these small, medium-sized enterprises to understand what is needed. And there was that element about failure. Briefly, just talk to us a little bit about why some of them fail before they even start operations.
Well, there's, I think everyone will be familiar with the failure rates of companies in their first 5 years. I think the accepted number is about 80% of companies will fail in the first 5. Some numbers from the US that might or might not be a reference for other parts of the world, but only 0.05% of companies arrive at a stage of raising funds from venture capital. And only 0.01% of the 0.05% actually become unicorns or billion-dollar companies. So there's a lot of failure in starting a business, right? I mean, every entrepreneur will understand that, and every investor will understand that. The venture capital model, it's almost like betting, if you will. I hope there's no VCs here, I'm sorry. But they will make, for instance, 10 investments, and they know for a fact that out of these 10 investors, 5 or 6 are going to fail, are going to fold. And we can go on the reasons why a company folds. Maybe the technology is not appropriate. Maybe there's no market fit. Maybe there's issues with the funding. Maybe there's issues with macroeconomic crisis, like the ones that we're going through today, and we're going to see a lot of companies failing. We are seeing already. So it's why a company fail. There are many, many reasons. I believe that in the technology space, what we see and what Steph mentioned is solving a problem where the problem really doesn't exist. right? And that I think is something that we see quite a lot in tech. You create a problem in your head and then you solve that problem with technology. I believe that that's what we see. A lot of decks on tech firms in early stage are not really solving a problem. I guess everybody in technology will tell you that your product needs to be solving someone else's problem, and you have to find a way ultimately to monetize that. And I think maybe that's one, at least my perspective on the failures of the tech companies.
Laurette?
Thank you very much. My question is to Stefano. My name is Tendai Mtana. I'm the County Executive Committee member from Mombasa County. And I'd just like to speak a little bit on the interrelation between the agrovet and what is emerging now as the warehouse receipting infrastructure. Because I know that as county governments over the last 1 year, we've approved a number of regulatory mechanisms, particularly around warehouse receipting, given the need for a differentiation between commodity value and market value. What I mean by that is a lot of the farmers have produce, particularly at post-harvest, that needs a slow release into the market for them to be able to get better pricing. Earlier on this morning, we spoke about financial interventions, and one of the things that was spoken about is collateral. Now, when I hear a little bit about iProcure, there seems to be a link and an opportunity. I don't know how tenuous it is as to whether the system you're running could also align with the warehouse.
Yeah, thank you for that. I personally don't know a lot about the offtake side. So on the produce side, I don't really have much expertise. In terms of how applicable our tech is, it could be applied. But this is obviously works against putting our interest front and center. I do think the biggest problem that we need to solve in agriculture, above affordable inputs, above access to credit for inputs, is really providing stable markets, right? And that slow release you were talking about is part and parcel of that, right? So there are ways to sort of reverse engineer what we've done, or at least apply it in sort of a front to back, if you will, right? So I'll give an example. In our life cycle, we didn't just land on the current business model. I mentioned earlier we've been through several iterations, right? One of those iterations involved working with farmer cooperatives, and mainly dairy cooperatives. What we used to do there was not just provide input supply software, so software that sort of facilitates the steady supply of inputs to the member farmers, but also a grading system that would allow us to grade the quality of milk, keep track of the quantity collected, etc., etc. Now, those systems are now really what we need in terms of ensuring that there is some sort of, how do I put it, that there's some sort of, so these systems used to facilitate credit, the processor that was collecting from that dairy cooperative, the data that these systems would render to this processor was what they used to lend to the farmer against, right? And they would even sort of lend for future supply of milk, not necessarily what was actually supplied already, right? Now, in terms of how that can be applied to grains, I don't want to oversimplify a problem that's clearly complex, but the first approach I would use would be to, and there are many systems like that, right? I mean, I know of a few competitors of ours who are now focusing on the off-taking side and the receipting systems. Those systems can clearly facilitate sort of access to market. But ultimately, what needs to happen is local businesses, local feed millers need to prioritize purchasing of produce from grains in particular from local farmers before considering sort of imports, right? it's a bit of a fumbled answer, but given my limited knowledge on the offtake side, that's the best you'll get out of me.
Thank you, Stefano. We really appreciate your answer and the personal view in terms of what you make of it. And even as we wind up, I know time is up. Julian, if you're still with us, I'd like us to finish up by giving us some sentiments in relation to government policy, regulation. I know it is a critical sector that we touched on a bit, but if you can give us just a little answer, a firmed up answer in terms of where Kenya is in terms of regulation and what needs to be done, very briefly.
Wow, that brief and that topic are not two things that go together, right? I think there's a couple of things. One of the things we haven't talked about on this panel, but it does link back to the ICT technologies. Food waste is a much bigger contributor to emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and the whole climate emergency than is given. That is broadly kind of recognized in most kind of modern literature, and therefore the importance of having cooling to reduce food loss is really important. One of the big things the government is working on at the moment is a national cooling strategy. I'd love to see that kind of advance more quickly and really advance with a view to having high quality technology. Because again, cooling, this is very specific stuff, but cooling can be done cheaply and badly, and you can get rubbish results. Or you can get something that will be high value over a long period of time, and that will make a big difference. That big difference is both to the underlying economics of the farm by reducing loss rates, right the way through to the amount of emissions that take place, through to how it's managed. Generally, there's a couple of other things that kind of generally we've got to increase the standard of cooling across agriculture is what we're seeing. Of course, I would say that. The reason I think you need to say that, though, is a couple of things. There is going to be increasing pressure, particularly in the export world, around the carbon footprint. That is, on top of that, you then have the recent, the challenges that have happened with air freight, and then in terms of the fact that it's gone up in price and there's less of it, combined then with the challenges we've already spoken about in terms of the cost of fertilizer. So that really means that for the horticulture sector, to really kind of make the most and get some margin back in the business, more margin back in the business, you've got to move and shift towards sea freighting. If you want to do sea freighting, you need to have good regulation. And like one of the things that I kind of, whatever the answer is, you just want consistency in business so that you can plan around it, which was kind of something Stefano said earlier as well. Effectively giving people consistency, they can work and plan. But I do see a big future whereby exports will start to move through sea freight. To do sea freight, you need to have really, really good cooling, on-farm pre-cooling to make sure you lock in the quality. To do that, you also then need support around the financing. There's an interwoven with those things are many, many different government policies. I think a good one is going to be towards getting the national cooling strategy out. One of the challenges we inevitably face on cooling as well is getting technical now, but the type of refrigerants we use. We, within Kenya, East Africa, and beyond, we are using refrigerants which are banned in the EU. We need to find a way of changing the market so that we can use lower polluting and more sustainable refrigerants across the market. That's a very hard thing to do and to have changed because there's technology that's 10 plus years old that would need replacing there. But that is the pressure that will come inevitably with the broader global pressure to reduce emissions. I hope it's a pretty rambly answer, but I hope that does give you a bit of an indication. Get the national cooling strategy out, give people consistency is probably the summary points.
Thank you, Julian. Mitch, less carbon emissions, of course, equals to smart economics. And even as we finish, Stefano, perhaps I can start with you so that we can finish with Julio. Stefano, is the government doing enough in terms of introducing policies that are fostering information technology in transformative produce? There's a chuckle. Briefly.
No, it's a tricky question to answer. But not by requiring sort of, we have some of the best developers in the world here, which is why I don't understand why people outsource their engineering to places like Lithuania or Eastern Europe. I mean, we have really good engineers here. I work with some of them. but making it more difficult for, provided, I'm an engineer, right? And if you're building a bridge, or you're building medical hardware, or even medical software, then you do need the requisite sort of qualifications, right? Because people's lives are at risk, you need to ensure that individual is well and formally trained in what they're doing, right? But when it comes to requiring, and unfortunately it's not, I don't think it's any longer in play, but when it comes to sort of requiring software developers to have certain formal qualifications to be seen, to be allowed to develop software, then it starts to kind of hinder sort of the creative spirit that we have, right? And it also hinders innovation, right? I am self-taught, not by any means good at software development. You can talk to my co-founders, they'll tell you that. But I enjoy it. And I don't think I should have to have a software development degree in order to develop software. So those kind of policies, I think, are a little bit unnecessary. But having said that, I think it is generally a very good climate for innovation. But that's just because you asked me to point something out, right? Yeah.
Julio, okay, now, very quickly and very brief. Is Kenya, compared to other developed markets, Kenya is a frontier market, depending with how you're looking at it. It's a frontier market and a developing country. Are we there yet? Are we headed there? Is the government doing enough to ensure that we compete with markets such as South Africa, Nigeria, and even Ghana, because Ghana is coming up really strong in terms of financial solutions?
I think Kenya is on the forefront on a number of areas. I believe that in terms of attracting investment in sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya is number 2 or 3 this year and historically. I think the government and the regulator authorities have done a good job in making Kenya a destination for investment. I think both for early stage companies and also large corporates. So I think lots of work to be done, but if you look at the hard facts, Kenya today is on the forefront of the venture capital, and I dare to say even private equity markets in sub-Saharan Africa. So, B+.
We'll get to the A. Okay, thank you so much. Such an A-star panel. We had Julian Mitch, Chief Executive Officer of Inspira Farms Limited. Of course, he is commercially minded business executive who has successfully shaped, led and developed organizations in fintech, off-grid energy and the British military in Europe, Central Asia and East Africa. He holds a Master of Science in Defense Geospatial Information from Cranfield University. And Stefano Cacoforo, Chief Executive Officer of iProcure Limited. He, of course, chose to pursue a career in systems engineering, very passionate about systems engineering, and began his career by working for a branch of Philips Engineering as a systems engineer. He has worked extensively overseeing large development projects in Cameroon and Haiti. Of course, this is post the earthquake. And he holds a Bachelor in Engineering, Mechanical Engineering from Oxford Brookes University. And of course, finally, we had Julio de Souza, Vice President for Stratlink Advisory Group. He is a financial advisor, management consultant, and a serial entrepreneur with 14 years of experience across multiple industries. Of course, he was selected as an Acumen Fund East Africa Fellow inaugural class of 2011. He is also a mentor of entrepreneurs at Unreasonable Institute, Growth Hub, and MLab. And I've been your host, Brenda Kirubo. Thank you so much for staying tuned in this specific session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brenda, Stefano, Julian. And Stefano's the walk of stage. That was a session centered on fostering information technology-enabled transformative products. So as we transition off that particular segment,